So now we're really just waiting for people to join. Until then, you can admire my companion, Katya, because an editor is nothing without his rats. And while we wait, okay. Well, we have one person. Make yourself known. There's a chat function on the side of the broadcast, so people should be able to type questions or type comments. So someone else has joined. Are you able to use the group chat function at all? It should be on the right-hand side of the broadcast screen. Actually, left. There's like a bunch of buttons. 3 viewers. Ooh. Just excuse me while I quickly update something on Facebook, and then I will get started. Today, to sort of kick off, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the book and why I wrote it and why I think I have the authority to write it. Editing is a weirdly contentious topic in the writing world. It tends to be something that people argue about a lot. They argue about the definitions of where editing actually starts. Does it start with rewriting? Does it start with line editing? You know, is it just copy editing? Is that the only kind of editing we have? So effectively, you know, writing Fix Your Damn Book, it's actually in a bit of a vacuum. There's not really a whole lot of material for indie authors about editing. There's a lot of material for indie authors about writing. There's a growing amount of literature for publishing and for succeeding in publishing, but there's not actually really much about editing as a craft. And there's definitely nothing about the mentality editing requires to be effective, and how you can sort of like move from the writing headspace to the editing headspace. Like, that's kind of a big thing as well. So I will just switch these windows so that I'm not looking to the side all the time, because my camera is on my left-hand screen. Can you guys all hear me all right? You should be able to type in the group chat, which is on the up left-hand corner. There's like a little blue speech bubble. If you click that, you will go into a chat screen where you can type things, or you can type to me on Facebook. I don't mind, but if you type to me on Facebook, then I have to look away from the camera. Queries, summaries, and loglines, which everyone hates. Okay, and as mysterious as they are useful. All right. So there's 6 people now, so I'll probably get started on the actual content of the webinar. Thank you very much for coming, and a huge thanks to Cello for organizing the event. She's put a lot of work into this and has done a really great job getting everyone together, and she's been actually doing a lot of behind the scenes work as well. So for those of you who know me, I'm James. I've been a regular on the NaNoWriMo Writers Group for about 3 years. And I've been a regular on Kboards for about the last sort of 12 to 18 months. I had a bit of a break on Kboards, but I've been there for quite a while as well. So you probably know me as the author of Bloodhound. That's backwards in the camera, but oh well. Bloodhound is my debut full-length release. I also have a novella that I put out in 2012, God Has Heard, which is a science fiction. This is Katya. Katya is a hairless rat. She is my staunch companion in the in the day-to-day grind of producing sometimes up to 5,000 words a day, as well as working at my day job, which is editing. I've been a staff editor for the Australian Journal of Dementia Care since 2011. I've worked with Alzheimer's Australia as well, and TrueConf LLC, who is they're basically like the largest telecom company in Russia right now, sort of like Russian Skype. So they run a very large sort of enterprise that works with the Russian government and stuff. And I do a lot of their English language editing. So they often produce texts that are translated directly from Russian, and they send them to me, and I sort of edit them so that they are fluent. Besides then, I've done a lot of freelance work for legal companies. I've done a lot of freelance work in the health and science industry, and I've also done a lot of work in the fiction world. So I write fiction. I've been an avid writer and an avid reader since I was in my teens. And essentially, the reason I wrote Fix Your Damn Book was because there wasn't really any book in the market that really just dealt with editing as a craft. There were some editing books that deal with sort of like editing as a process. I don't know how else to explain it, but they don't really get into like the professional stuff that I learned on stuff that made my job easier. So really what I wanted to do was create a book that worked for people who had just finished a manuscript or who were sitting on a draft manuscript and who were wondering, you know, how can I make this better? You know, what am I missing? And how do I miss less as I go through my own book? And, you know, how do I save money? How do I save time with editing? And that's really what inspired me to write Fix Your Damn Book, which is the bright blue cover, which I will also post to Facebook. And so, yeah, I ended up writing it while I was in Budapest. Actually, I was traveling. I was in Hungary, and I was living in Budapest in this really beautiful apartment. So I started writing it on my bed after sort of wanting to find a book like it and not being able to. And also after hearing a lot of people in the Nano group and in my other writers groups also sort of talking about, you know, why can't I find a good book on editing? So that's sort of really what inspired it. And what I wanted to do with the book really was to get into the psychology of editing, not just the technical stuff. So the book is divided into 4 sections, well, 4 major sections, and that's intentional, and it has to do with the editing process itself. Editing professionally for magazines or for novels is typically a 4-step process, not including the writing and sort of the post-production stuff like publishing, marketing, that sort of thing. The actual editing process takes 4 stages generally. And those 4 stages are developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Now, proofreading for indies actually counts beta reading as well. Essentially, because indies are generally bootstrapping their careers, it's really important to have that community and to be able to sort of find people that you can talk to and who can review your work for you and give you a new set of eyes. So having a writers group is really important. Having beta readers is really important. Having a first reader is really important. And this is all stuff that I talk about in the book as well. Because the book is sort of aimed for indies, it's got a lot of stuff about the community building process that goes into being a successful indie author. So hang on a second, I'll just quickly answer a query on Facebook. The video will also be available on YouTube for the hour. Some people are apparently not able to join the webinar, so I'm just letting them know that there will actually be, like, the entire video with some of the boring parts edited out will be up on YouTube after the live cast is over. So if you want to catch some of it and you sort of have to go somewhere, you can catch the rest on YouTube. So really, the first thing I'm going to do is do a bit of reading so that you can get an idea of what is in the book. I would like for people to pick it up someday. And just so you know, if you join my mailing list in this hour, I'm going to be running a special 99-cent sale for it when it first comes out, and that's going to be a secret sale. So basically only people on my mailing list are going to know about it. The official release date will be about a week after it actually comes out, and that's one of the good things about self-publishing as well, is that you can do things like that. So essentially, like, people who are on my mailing list, they're going to get first dibs on the low price, and after that it's going to go up. It's going to be like $6. So if you want to get it for 99 cents in the first week, I'm going to post a mailing list link, which is this guy here, and you'll also get some like free chapters and things. So I'll put that. I love this Google Air thing, actually, it's great. So I just posted that item. That should work. Okay, you should be able to see that now. All right, so the reading I'm going to do today is about one of the most important developmental stages in editing, and it's the stage that everyone hates. It's the stage where you have to, if you haven't already, written your logline, your query / blurb, and your synopsis, okay? Those 3 things, like, people sort of think of those as being like the last step to do when it comes to writing and publishing a book. That's really not true. It's really, really not true. If you have finished a manuscript, or even if you've already published a manuscript and you're writing your 2nd or 3rd book, this is something I have learned through hard experience, and that I've also seen other authors who have succeeded with publishing really good books, and things that I've also seen while working in the magazine industry. What you want with a story, when you're looking at it from an editing perspective and you're just sort of going, okay, well, I've got this rough draft, I've got this idea, I know how I want the story to be, it's kind of not quite how I want it yet. The way you can fix that is by working out how to scale it. A good story should be able to be scaled from like 1 sentence through to a 7-page synopsis. You should literally be able to concertina that story and make it so that you can either tell people in a soundbite what it's about, or you can go into a more detailed description, but that's still concise. That's a really important step in editing, and that's one of the the big things that will make your book sort of stand out. A lot of first-time authors in particular, they tend to sort of write the story first. They just kind of pants it. They might have like a rough outline, but they're not necessarily looking at the future of what they're trying to produce. So what you often find, there's inconsistencies, there's scenes that don't quite flow together. They may not have quite discovered the heart of their book. And when you're starting out editing, finding that heart and nailing that down and then building your entire process around that is a really important thing. And any editor that you hire actually is going to do that for you with varying degrees of skill. And really, even if you're considering hiring an editor, and to be honest, I would recommend that you do if you're intending to publish professionally. One of the things you should really look at doing is doing this exercise where you nail down your log line, which is anywhere between 5 to 20 words at most. Nail down your log line, nail down a blurb, 1-page synopsis, 3-page synopsis, 7-page synopsis. Before you really start getting into editing, if you have that ability to describe your book in anywhere between 1 sentence and 7 pages, you're going to find editing and publishing to be way, way, way easier. And not only that, you're also going to find it easier to write the next book if you're writing a series, because when you've got those kinds of documents, you can look back to them and you can say, well, what was I doing at the midpoint of my first book? Oh, here we go. It's in the 7-page synopsis. So that's a really valuable exercise, and that's the section of book I'm going to read. So summaries and query letters. Editors and agents want plans and synopsis as well as query letters and blurbs. These sadists demand that authors condense their 200 to 500 page labor of love to 3 pages, then 1 page, then half a page, then a single paragraph, and then a sentence, which is your pitch or your logline. While this is extremely inhumane, and it is, there are several good reasons why agents and editors expect you to be able to do this and do it well. The most important of these reasons is that readers need these butchered summaries of your book to decide whether they want to read it or not. The callous, overworked agent who wants a query and synopsis is actually pushing you to do something very important. You have to be able to tell people what your book is about, and you have to be able to do it quickly. Start your query letters and back cover blurbs, log lines, elevator pitches, and other oppressively short summaries now. Yes, now. Months in advance of ever actually firing one off to an agent. Days ahead of beginning a comprehensive edit of your novel. While you're resting your book, you can be working on your summaries and your query letter. A query letter is essentially a business letter combined with a back cover blurb that you would like to see on the back of your novel. They should be short, professional, and interesting. Queries are very difficult to write. Along with the log line, they can take as long as a full novel draft to refine and perfect for some people. For a brief guide, check out Appendix A, the Dread Query. So there is an appendix in this book that is specifically dedicated to writing and editing query letters and back cover blurbs, which is something that many of us struggle with. So yeah, that's part of the book as well. So let's see where we're there. Here we go. A synopsis is a 1 to 3 page summary of your central plot. It's used to efficiently recount the main storyline and maybe one subplot in a straightforward, unembellished way. So essentially what you're doing with a synopsis is you're telling the story as if you were just like recounting a series of events. You know how like if you're telling your family a story and you're not really trying to embellish it, you're just kind of like, oh, so-and-so did this and he said that and she said this. Well, that's what you're doing with a synopsis. You don't want to actually make it too fancy. Queries, make them fancy. Like queries should always be fancy, but a synopsis doesn't really need to be fancy. It just needs to be really precise. It needs to be really accurate about what your story's about. The synopsis is a formal document type, like an essay, which means that, like a business letter or essay, it has rules and a standard format that is expected by those who ask for one. A 3-page synopsis is a 3-page synopsis, not a 7-page synopsis or a rambling spiel with liberal use of "I wrote it this way because." And if an agent specifies that they want a 1-page or a 3-page synopsis, they're not realistically going to make an exception for your novel. Now, I can tell you now, working in a magazine, we used to get these like incredible article proposals from people, usually people sort of on the fringes of whatever scientific discipline we were working for. So in my case, it was dementia. So we get like people who are like, coconut oil can cure dementia. And they literally send us like 3 or 4 pages of like self-justification mostly about why they should write this article and why it'll be fabulous and how brilliant it is. That kind of stuff is also very common in fiction publishing, and it's a primary reason why people get rejected, actually. They don't adhere to the formal document expectations that agents and publishers have of certain kinds of text. So when they're getting a query, they expect it to sort of fall within a certain set of parameters. They want an introduction. They want a formal kind of, I thought after reading your, your submissions page, I thought that XYZ agent would be interested in this novel because, and giving them the because is really important. And then you launch into the query itself, which is the blurb part, and then you wrap it up. They have this sort of expectation because it's a business letter. And it's the same thing like when you're contacting readers as well. If you're an indie and you're not actually going through an agent or publisher, they kind of expect the same thing, actually. They expect a certain kind of rhythm within a query, and that's a formal document type. It's like when you submit an essay to a teacher, they're looking for an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. It's the same sort of thing. So a logline is a single sentence that should capture the heart and soul of what your story is about. It's quite often the hardest task an author faces when they're thinking about pitching and selling their book, but it's your frontline summary. When people want to know what your book is about, you have to be able to tell them, and you have to be able to do it quickly. So here's the logline for Bloodhound, which was my debut novel. A Russian mafia hitman in New York City becomes the unwitting guardian of a unicorn. That's basically it. It's about a Russian mafia hitman who becomes the protector of a unicorn. Now, one thing that really helped me when I was learning to write loglines, I think it was the guy that wrote Save the Cat. I don't know if any of you have ever read that book. But Save the Cat talks about loglines and how important it is to have irony in a logline. So irony in this instance is something like the unwitting guardian. So basically, like Alexei, it sort of implies that Alexei doesn't know what he's doing for the better part of the story. And that's kind of weird because you sort of think, oh, he's a Russian mafia hitman. He's probably pretty sharp. How could he be unwitting about something? So that's the irony, and that's one kind of hook. Now, that's not necessarily the best logline ever. Like, there's so many better loglines. The people to really look at, if you're wanting to study up on how to write good loglines, is to look at filmmakers and script writers and people that work in TV. You can often find script pitches online if you search for like script pitch, or you can actually read some Hollywood scripts where they have the logline in the heading of the PDF file usually. A lot of studios actually publish their old scripts to help student filmmakers. So you can find those and look at their loglines. That's where you can really learn how to do that. And that's a really good one. So the one, I have an example in here that is actually a picture, so I can't really read it. Now, with a logline, one of the things that catches people up, it's generally, your novel is generally pretty complex. Most people have a plot, a subplot, maybe 2 subplots, sometimes more. It can be really hard to decide which thread you want to track through the book. And one thing that you often see is people will do that with the thread that they like the most, as opposed to the thread that might be the one that's most important for the book. So it's really important to do that, is define what your book is actually about. So like in Bloodhound, there's a kind of bromance, there's all this mafia politics, people get shot, people die, there's Alexei takes hits because he's a hitman. There's magic. His magic becomes more powerful when he nearly dies and he awakens. I'm sorry if you haven't read the book, and that's totally a spoiler. He sort of awakens to a higher level of magic. All of that stuff is really important. Like, he has a rivalry, and there's a serial killer, and there's a whole bunch of things. But really what you've got to get down to it is the thread that unites all of those things into one thing. That's your logline. That's what you want to talk about. The reason that's really important for editing is because when you're editing, what you want to be doing and the way that you will frame the developmental editing process is you want that logline and that little synopsis as being like a spine. It's like the skeleton of your book. And if you're trying to edit something and you don't have a strong skeleton, what you're going to find is that your editing wanders all over the place the same way that the first draft did. And so what you really want to do is cut to the heart of it, build your skeleton, and then you work your editing around that skeleton of information. And if you've got your synopsis, then you know what happens in the book. You know what is supposed to happen. So you can, as you're reading, as you're working through your book in chapters or chunks, and Fix Your Damn Book talks about the ways to split your book to help you edit faster and to help with this kind of thing. What you're wanting to do is you're wanting to look at every scene in that book and say, does this scene fit on my skeleton? Does it fill it on? Does it fill it in to make it what I need it to be? And that's why, you know, nailing down these things early on in the developmental process is really important. And one of the things that I talk about just after this little section about the synopsis is the ideal synopsis. So I'll read from this, and how are we doing for time? We're doing pretty well. All right, so summaries, synopsis, loglines, and queries are for your potential agents and audience. The ideal synopsis is for you. The ideal synopsis is the synopsis you write before you really crack into editing, which gives you a strong descriptive summary of what you want your book to be about. You had a vision when you started this novel. Whether it was a vague vision or a solid one, now that it's been written, it's time to ensure that the book is telling the story the way you want it. Creating the ideal synopsis is therefore a two-stage process. So during your first big read-through, note down all of your major plot points and write a rough synopsis. It doesn't have to be of good enough quality to send or written to any standard format, but try to keep the first synopsis fairly brief and unornamented. The synopsis should be a literal blow-by-blow summary of everything that happens in your story in the order you wrote it. Now, when you're doing this exercise, I recommend you do it verbatim so you don't try and correct yourself while you're doing this first draft of the ideal synopsis. Then what you do is you take that draft and in a new document, you work out where it might not be working for you. And then what you want to do is you literally want to write the story as you wish you had written it, if that makes sense. So you might find, oh, well, you know, so-and-so is doing this thing over here, and maybe that doesn't really relate to the main theme as much as I would have preferred. What do I do with it? Do I either reconfigure it and put it in a different place in the story? Do I delete it? You know, that's what you're working through with the ideal synopsis. So what you're wanting to do is write the story that, in brief, that you really, really wanted to write when you first started out with the novel, and compare the two drafts. So compare the verbatim draft and compare the ideal synopsis, and then mesh them together. And then you can hit the ground running with your editing. Okay. So that'll do for reading. I'm going to open up for questions pretty soon. I don't know how many people are actually following on here compared to on Facebook though. So I think what I'll do is quickly, Liz, I'm watching the webinar. I'm nodding so much that I probably look like a broken bobblehead. Liz, you're pretty hilarious. Okay, so one of the things that is a little more advanced in the editing process that has more to do with the actual craft of editing that I wanted to talk about was the thing I call the 3 C's. Now, people probably assume that's like character, you know, something else. The 3 C's are actually, and I recommend you take some notes down for this one because, you know, it's pretty useful info. Okay, the first of the 3 C's is the word congruency. Congruency, which I will post a link to because it is not a word that everybody knows. So congruency essentially relates to the idea of togetherness, that something is coherent, that everything intermeshes the way you want it, that you basically have a properly woven story. So congruency is different from perfectionism. And this is where people get sort of messed up with editing psychologically, okay? A story is never going to be perfect. Nothing you write will ever be perfect. Nothing you edit will ever be perfect. There's mistakes in Bloodhound. There's mistakes in trade paperbacks. There's mistakes in this. There's mistakes in every single story that has ever been created. That's just how that goes. You will never attain perfectionism with editing. And some people sort of approach their editing this way. They kind of think, oh, I should be in there killing my darlings, and I should be in there, you know, ripping things out and putting it up for people to snark at it and taking it to my writers group and letting them rip it apart. Not really. It's a really negative way of thinking about your work, when the important part of writing a successful story is for it to be congruent. And when something is congruent, it's in agreement, it's harmonious, it makes sense, okay? So a lot of the most successful indie books out there right now are not particularly like perfect stories. You know, I'm thinking of people like Domino Finn, who's just killing it in urban fantasy right now. You know, people who are sort of writing, you know, even Wool, Wool by Hugh Howey had quite a lot of mistakes in its first edition. And essentially, the most important thing, particularly when you're self-editing and you don't necessarily have the objective distance to catch every single error, and I firmly believe that self-editors can catch around 98% of errors in their books, so you can do a really good job just by yourself. But I think that congruency, the idea that something is coherent together, that all parts of it are in agreement, that the story makes sense, all your plot threads are resolved, everything's wound up. That's a really strong thing to have in focus while you're editing. So what I recommend that people do is that they create what I call a plot planner. And there's instructions on how to do that in Fix Your Damn Book. And essentially what you're doing with a plot planner is you're taking each individual thread of a story, which you identify in the developmental stage, and you're tracking it beat by beat and checking, essentially making like a checklist and then checking off what you've got written down and going through it and saying, does this make sense? Does this relate to the other parts of that thread? Does it relate to the other threads in the story? It's a fairly complex task. You can break it down in ways that help it make sense. And that's one of the things I definitely do cover in the book. The second C is conflict. Now, conflict is another thing that I feel is sometimes misunderstood in the writing community. Conflict as a catalyst for story, and you could equally just call conflict catalyst, doesn't necessarily have to be violent. It doesn't have to be dramatic. And one of the things I talk about in Fix Your Damn Book is the difference between drama and conflict, and why drama is useful sometimes and why conflict is useful sometimes. Conflict doesn't have to be vitriolic. It doesn't have to be like anger. One of the examples I use in Fix Your Damn Book actually is the conflict inherent, say, in a new romance. So when two people have just kind of gotten together and they're like glued at the hip, that's a really conflictual time, actually. And that's why so many stories are actually written about people falling in love. They're not written about people who are like married for 15 years and comfortable together. You know, there's a reason why falling in love is such a story-worthy thing. And part of that is to do with the way that conflict is actually a significant part of that kind of state of being. And it has to do with the way, like, two people who are in love, they are really attracted to each other, but they don't know each other very well. And so what happens is, like, you know, partner A is like, you know, I love peas and I love cats and I hate dogs. And partner B is like, well, I love dogs and I don't like peas, but that's so cute. And that's what they're like, you know, when you see people who are like just starting out dating, that's what they're like, isn't it? And really, those are kind of seeds of conflict to come, because, you know, like 6 months down the track, once the shine's worn off a bit, they're going to be arguing over whether or not they get a dog or a cat and who eats peas. You know, it's one of those things that can presage conflict. So conflict can be a very subtle thing. It can be a kind of what was called in Save the Cat, it was called the hint of death, is also a form of conflict where there's not actually conflict now, but there's a hint of it in the future. So that's a really important thing with editing as well. What you're doing is you're checking off, does each scene have a conflictual catalytic role in the story? And the last one, which is not one that most people have heard of before, is cadence. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard the word cadence. Cadence essentially refers to a thing in music, actually. So I'll draw up the definition for you. Cadence is a modulation or inflection of the voice, a sequence of notes or chords comprising the close of a musical phrase. When you're talking about cadence in writing, what you're talking about is the sound of the writing. And Fix Your Damn Book goes into some detail about why cadence is important and how, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the whole writers need to have a unique voice. That's one of the big reasons people get rejected, actually, is because they get a query letter. They get a query letter reply back that says, "Oh, I didn't like the voice," or "I didn't feel this book had any voice." But relatively few books have ever gone into what voice actually is. And what voice is really, it boils down to cadence. It boils down to the way that you put words together in a sentence that makes them sound a particular way. So I'll call up an example here. Like, every writer has their own style, and there is a difference between style and cadence, but I'll pull up a little example in the first chapter of my second book, actually. So cadence can be something like this. Okay, the forest occupies a place deep in the imagination of every Slav, the paradox of fertile earth and unclean energy, providing for and consuming those who trespass through its reaching needles. Okay, that's a fairly long sentence. That sentence really embodies the sort of cadence that I personally like. Okay, it's dark, it's got a lot of sort of long flowing words, it's kind of a little poetic. That's my preferred cadence. A really good example of a voice in contemporary fiction right now is China Mieville. I don't know if you've ever read China's work. He wrote Perdido Street Station and a couple of other books. King Rat, which is one of my favorite books ever, actually. He wrote a few books, and he has a really distinctive use of cadence. Like, he really lays on the purple prose. He's really into that kind of very verbose, very literary kind of genre fiction. He has a really distinct and really pronounced use of cadence. What you're doing essentially is listening to the sound of the words that they put together. You often get, in first draft manuscripts, you get these really clumsy sentences, and you get things like, I should call up an example. There's some really funny examples in Fix Your Damn Book, by the way, most of which were taken from role-playing sessions that I've sat in, like text role-playing. Oh my God, some of the sentences you get out of it's just hilarious. So let me find Johnny the Vampire Hunter. Yes, that is a thing. Okay, so here's one. All right, this is bad cadence. Okay, don't do this. Vampire Johnny Hunter B strolled down Main Street in his black trench coat, smoking a cigarette. He looked over the city bars and wondered where he would find his next job. Okay, that is voiceless. That sentence has no voice. An editor would look at that, and even though some people would sort of go, "Oh, well, it's grammatical, it makes sense, we know who the guy is and what he's doing," there's no cadence to it. There's no voice. So what you want to do with your own work is decide what kind of voice you want to have. What kind of prose do you admire? What kind of story do you want to tell? How do you want to tell it? So let's look at what the author wants to tell us with Vampire John Honeybee strolled down Main Street, blah, blah, blah. The author wants to tell us that he's a vampire hunter, okay? That's his first thing. That's what he wants to show us. So he does it the most obvious sort of 12-year-old way that he can. He's in a city or a town with a seedy Main Street locale, okay? He's trying to write a sort of noir thing, but he doesn't have the voice. He doesn't have the mastery of cadence. So he's just kind of like, here he is, He's down on his luck. He needs work and he needs money, okay? He thinks he's a badass, all right? He really thinks he's cool, and he's trying to show how cool he is by putting him in a trench coat, and he's smoking, and he's really trying to sort of do something. But what he actually needs to do this is learn how to control the English language through cadence, okay? There's many ways he could do this, and that preference for how to do it is as individual as every writer. A good editor, like a good third-party editor, someone you hire to go through your book, will get a sense of what your voice is, what you want your voice to be. And what they will actually do is they will edit your book, and they will find a sentence like this, and they're going to come back to you and they're going to pick it apart, okay? They're going to pick it apart the same way I did. It's brutal, it's hard, it's somewhat easier when you do it yourself, but it's still not completely easy. And that's really sort of the top three things that I would recommend you look at while you're editing. So congruency, conflict, and cadence are your three big ones. Cadence is a little hard to explain in the time we've got because it's such a complex and such a sort of novel thing to think about. It comes down to rhythm, and I think that's why some people sort of say, "Oh, I don't have any talent at writing." What they're actually talking about is they don't really have mastery of cadence. And what you can do, it's a skill. So it's a skill, it's a trade, you can build it. If you feel that you're lacking in cadence or that someone you know could do with some help with it, it's something they can learn to do. And that's one of the things that I've kind of written about a bit. So at this point, I'm going to go back to Facebook. I'm going to take questions and I'm going to post some like snippets and stuff of things. And then, yeah, you can pretty much fire away. The other thing that I was going to do was quickly pimp my mailing list, actually. If you join up to the mailing list, you get a poster. A surprise, shiny poster. No, the poster is actually a complete summary of every point that I wrote about in Fix Your Damn Book. So I'll post the link again, and I'll post it on Facebook as well. So if you can't like see it here, you can find it on Facebook. But the poster, if you don't want to be on the mailing list, just sign up and then unsubscribe. It's I don't really mind if you want to unsubscribe. I've got it so that I can sort of monitor click-throughs, but essentially, if you sign up to the mailing list, you'll get your poster, you get a free chapter from Fix Your Damn Book, which is a long chapter on passive voice. And passive voice is probably the most contentious topic on the internet when it comes to editing. People just, for some reason, have no idea what to do with passive voice. So I've shared the passive voice chapter for free. And you also can get access to all of my fiction samples that I give to my other mailing list, my fiction mailing list. If you want to opt in for my fiction updates, you can do that on the form. And other than that, yeah, really, it's just time to go back to Facebook and talk to people there. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. I'm sorry if it was a bit rushed. I have had no sleep. The fact that I can string 3 words together at the moment is something of an achievement. I would like any feedback that you have. And if you would like to actually review an advanced copy of Fix Your Damn Book, I'm looking at giving some of those away. So let me know by message or let me know on Facebook or ask, and we'll see what we can do. So thanks, and I'm just going to end the broadcast now and post it to YouTube. So cheers.